us said that because he hasn't read any of my books. So he can't begin to count if he hasn't read them. And the 26 million, what was the 21 million you said? That was, you know, on Thursday. It's 50 million as of today. Well, okay, so let's start with what counts, and that's the book side of things. I'm in the midst of, or I guess at the tail end of writing a new trilogy. Who knew that would happen? In the Shannara series, these are a set of 3 standalones that are connected by overlapping characters more than plot lines. They stand independently, so you can read one and you will have completed the story. This is because people keep saying, how come you can't just write one book once in a while? All right, so I did. I've written one book, and then I've written 2 more one-books. And even though there are some same characters in the 3 books, there are also separate storylines. So the first is the one that you hopefully hold in your hands, HIGH DRUID'S BLADE. I started writing that not so long ago, and then my publisher, after doing the Witch Wraith, the others too, whatever, Bloodfire Quest, and so forth, said, well, you could do more than 1 a year, couldn't you? And I said, no, I couldn't. It's too darn much work, and you know, I don't work that way very well. So finally they relented, and as a result, by the time I finished the second book, they said, okay, you can write 1 a year. So I had already written the books for this year and next year, and now I'm working on the book for 2017. I'm going to read from the second book tonight, one of the chapters in the book, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. I will say that this series is important because number one, it's a departure from my usual world expansion epic story. It's more personal, it is more character-driven, and it's a setup for the trilogy that will follow sometime in the next 5 years, which will bring the Shannara series to a conclusion. I have been looking to do that before the unexpected happens, even though my plan was to live forever. Like I say, you never know. Maybe that won't happen. And if the unforeseen should happen, you know, I don't want Brandon Sanderson writing the end of my book. So, you know, that always gets a laugh. No, I like Brandon. He's a good guy. I just want to write my own ending to my own story because that's like the worst thing I can think of is that you spend years writing a series and then, you know, and it's happened, as we know, and then somebody else writes the ending and you're not there to even see it. So I'm sticking around and I'm writing my own ending. So that'll happen in the next few years. This is, and what happens in these books, even though it will not overtly appear so, is directly related to what you will see happening in the final 3 books, and is in large part a setup for character, place, plot, and so forth. So that's why that's important. So before we do anything else, I'm going to quickly read to you, or maybe not so quickly, we'll see how it goes, from the 4th chapter in the second book, which is called Darkling Child. It doesn't need any setup. I'm not going to give you any setup. I'm just going to read you the part that I've chosen, and you can draw your own conclusions, and if you don't have any, that's okay too. 6 months later, on a rainy night made considerably less pleasant by a sudden drop in the temperature just before dusk, Rain Frosh walked into the Boar's Head Tavern in the village of Portlow shortly before performance time. Shivering with the damp and cold in spite of his heavy all-weather cloak, he stood in the tavern doorway and brushed himself off, shedding raindrops in discomfort while he scanned the faces of the patrons gathered in the great room. More than 100, he guessed. Much more, in fact. They were 3 deep, and the serving bar and the tables were filled. Well, almost filled. He noticed one in the back of the room where a man in a black cloak and hood hunkered down over his drink in splendid solitude, the rest of the room choosing to give him a wide berth. No one had mustered the courage to ask for the 2 chairs that sat empty in front of him, even though other patrons were standing everywhere about the room, most of them finding places to help hold up the walls. Shrugging the strap of the case that protected his aileron higher onto his shoulder, he moved over to the serving counter and stepped around its end to reach the kitchen. He gave Gammon a wave as he passed through the door, not bothering to slow. The room beyond was filled with casks of ale, dry foodstuffs, packages of meats, and bins of vegetables. Table settings and implements, candles and lamps, a pair of stoves, and a cook standing over a griddle, working diligently on preparing food for customers. "Rain, lad," the old greased dog offered, one hand lifting in an attempt at a jaunty salute. Smoke rose and steam spat from the griddle, and food smells filled the room, the mix venting poorly through screened openings in the walls. In spite of the vents, the room was stifling. Rain waved back and walked over to the coat rack to shrug off his instrument and cloak and hang both over the wooden pegs. Gammon came through the door. "Big crowd for you tonight, Rain. Hope you've got your nimble fingers and angelic voice finely tuned and strongly flavored." He brushed the drops of water from his shaggy blonde hair and snatched a roll from a pan cooling on the stovetop. The cook gestured threateningly with his spatula, but without enough emphasis to be convincing, and then motioned to the platter of meat sitting next to him. Rain helped himself, building a sandwich and eating the results. Gammon found him a glass of ale to wash down his food and brought it over to him. The barkeep paused, watching him, and then headed for the door. "As soon as you're done, come on out and do some songs. They're getting restless out there. You can soothe them a bit. Maybe they'll fuss less." "Kind of an angel, is it?" the greased dog purred and grinned broadly. Rain knew better than to say anything back. He simply nodded as if it were a compliment he deserved rather than a taunt. One thing he could say for certain: there wasn't an insult he hadn't heard or a name he hadn't endured. It came with the territory, and he'd learned long ago to absorb the blows. His voice. That was the spark to the fire. His fortune and his misfortune. Hard to know which sometimes. Both, he supposed. Right now it was paying for his way in the world and his place in Portlow, so he was feeling good about it. Other times it had been a different story. That was the way his life worked, though. He'd learned that much along the way. He finished his sandwich and drained his glass of ale. Moving over to the coat rack, he took down the Ellerin, removed it carefully from its case, and slung the strap over his shoulder. Standing in the kitchen amid the smells and the cooking and the rise of the heat from the stove and griddle, he tuned it carefully, turning the pegs that tightened the 8 strings one after another while plucking experimentally to bring them all into sync. Then he fastened a metal slide in place at the apex of the instrument's narrowing neck and threaded multiple chords to check for tuning. When he was satisfied with results, he took a deep breath, exhaled, gave a cheery call over to the grease dog, and headed for the great room door. It was pandemonium. Shouts and jokes and raucous laughter, voices seeking to be heard over the roar of other voices, empty tankards of this and that libation slammed on the bar in search of a refill, feet stamping and backs being slapped, the room jammed with patrons locked elbow to shoulder, shoulder to elbow, heads bent close, bodies radiating heat and sweat. There was barely room for him to get to the small platform where he performed, set back against the wall at the far end of the room. The tables and chairs closest were pushed right up against the edge of this 4x4 space. As he neared, shouts and whistles rose from listeners familiar with his playing, sounds of encouragement and approval that caused him to flush with pleasure. He knew he was good. He knew he could make them feel things that they didn't even know that they were capable of feeling. He had the gift. He stepped onto the platform and settled himself on the stool placed there for his use. The room began to quiet immediately. He tested the strings of the Ellerin once more, strumming chords, ear held close so he could hear accurately. By the time he was finished, voices had quieted almost to a silence, and all eyes were on him. Without preamble, he began to play. He chose a crowd favorite, a tale about a highwayman and the woman he loved, but who betrayed him to the authorities so that he was trapped and died calling out her name. It was sweet and poignant, its refrain instantly memorable after one hearing it. Da-da-da-da-da-da. When he was finished and the highwayman was dispatched and Ellen Jean revealed for the faithless woman they all knew she was, you could have heard a pin drop. Then the clapping and pounding began and the room was on its feet calling for more. He went back to it immediately. Another crowd favorite, a drinking song featuring an old woodsman and his dog. He played with almost no pause for the better part of an hour. His music and his voice ensnaring them like wondering children, mesmerizing them as they listened and visions rose and memories surfaced. He wove their emotions into each song, making it live and breathe for them in ways a mere tune never could. All felt the emotional ache his music aroused within, rejoicing in the happy songs, mourning with the sad. All were caught up in a transformative experience that for a few minutes at least changed everything about them. It was his gift that captured them. that wove through their hearts and minds and made them smile or cry. It was not the playing, which was only an accompaniment. It was in his voice where the real magic could be found, in the way he worked a song through changes in modulation, pauses, slides up and down the scale, emphasis added and withdrawn. With his voice, he could make them believe. No one was immune. Wherever he went, whomever he played for, they were his for as long as he sang. No, it's better than that. The problem was that it didn't end there, and the result wasn't always pleasant. His voice could provide a healing balm, but it could be a weapon too. And in the heat of a moment's careless lapse, or an ill-considered emotional surge, it could shift from the former to the latter. And even that wasn't the worst of it. What it did to him was even more terrifying. When he used the magic in the wrong way, in an ill-advised response to anger or fear, it whisked him away and dropped him into a deep, dark nothingness, into a place where everything disappeared and time stopped. It happened all at once and without warning. It was as if he had been yanked outside himself. A scattering of times it had happened thus far, times that were among the blackest of his life. To lose all sense of what was happening, to be stripped of control and become a helpless prisoner in a timeless nothingness was something he could barely stand to think about. He did not want it to happen to him ever again. He would do anything to prevent it. He sang his last song for the hour, stood up to receive the resultant applause before departing the tiny stage and moving back over behind the bar to gain some space. Calls for drinks for the player, the singer, the music man rang through the great room, but he declined them. Drink fogged his mind, and a fogged mind was dangerous for someone with his condition. As marvelous as his gift could be, it could also be as unpredictable. No matter the urges he felt, he couldn't let his guard down. With a moment's carelessness, the darker emotions would take control, and his singing could turn lethal. At the back of the room, the stranger in the black cloak was staring at him, his narrow features revealed, bladed and flat. His eyes glittered, but there was no malice or ill intent reflected. Odd, Rain thought. Then the head lowered, and the face disappeared back into shadow. The boy studied him a moment longer, and then he turned and went back into the kitchen for something more to eat. The singing, the turning of his audience from doubters into believers, the giving to them what they didn't even know they wanted, it was all hard work, and it made him hungry. Standing at the griddle, he made himself another sandwich, casting occasional glances at the old grease dog as he cooked food, prepared plates, and called off the orders to Sorcy and Fennel, the two serving girls. His gaze shifted to a tiny window in the darkness outside. He wished he knew more about the source of his power. He didn't question that it was a form of magic. He had accepted that a long time back. If you could use your voice to do the things that he had done, good and bad, you commanded magic. But where had it come from? Why did he have it? His parents hadn't told him, assuming they had even known. They were dead before he was even old enough to ask the questions that plagued him now. He could still see them in his mind, dragged from their home by the townspeople to be stoned until they were dead. Because of him. Because of his voice. Because of what he was suspected of being by frightened, superstitious fools. He shut his eyes against the thoughts and memories. He hadn't seen them die, but he knew they had. They had been gone by then. He had been gone by then. He had done what they had told him to do and hidden in the old man's cart so he could be spirited away from what was coming. He hated himself for having allowed it. He could have helped them. He could have stopped what had happened. Or he could have died with them. The old man who took him could have left and gone his way. But neither had happened. That was how life worked. If you read any of my work, you probably know what's going on there. I cut that short, and I severely cut away things that you don't need to know until you've started the book. But that gives you a taste of what the second story is about. And that is, in fact, the main character, Rain Frosh. So, what should we talk about? I suppose we had better say something about, how many of you don't know about the TV show? Oh, Sean. My web nerd Sean is back there. He's from Battleground.
Washington.
Sean is very faithful. However, before I got up here, he said, "Good luck." Makes me wonder what he knows. Yeah, you know, here I am. How many years has it been? A long time. Sword of Shannara 77. I think I've been touring since Powell's in '82. So that's a long time. Okay, so this TV show thing. If you go to the website, you can get the links to what people have to say about it if you don't care. I've read them all. They all say the same thing, so if you read one, you've pretty much covered all the ground. There's a lot of uncertainties in this. Obviously, I've been working on this for a long time. There's been a lot of doubt about whether this was a good idea. Not more than one person has written in and said, "What do you think you're doing? Putting elf stones with MTV? What the hell's wrong with you?" Or words to that effect. But I know what I'm doing, and it's the right place for it. And they're the right people, and they do know what they're doing, and they have put a lot of muscle and money behind this project. So if it's ever going to succeed, this is it. It was never really meant to be a movie because, you know, it's too big, and it needs to be a series. And I particularly like the idea that as a series, we can riff off of it with other books. We can continue on and do whatever seems to be the right thing to do. The people at MTV and the writers in particular are very open to ideas about what might happen after the first season, assuming somebody watches this thing. I think that there's a fairly good chance people will because, as I say, the writers are excellent, by the way. They're really good. I was worried about this because usually people who write my work for the movies, for example, are terrible. And it gives me, you know, it causes great harm to me to have to read their work. But in this case, I've read the first pilot episode and the second episode, and they're very, very good. And these guys are very tuned in to what it is I'm trying to accomplish with this. And I think that it's helped that, from my perspective, I said to them, you know, you're the writers. You do this thing. You know, you don't have to be slavish to me. I want you to adapt it. I don't want you to be slavish about how you do this. Just keep it together in a way that makes sense and that doesn't destroy the story at its, you know, in its base. And they seem to be very much attuned to that. As I said, they changed the opening to the book in the way in which things unfold. It will be more dramatic as a video presentation that way. I can see it right now. I would have written it that way myself, you know, had I known that this was what was going to happen. I barely had to do anything except cross a T here and dot an I there for the first episode, so I'm encouraged, to say the least, that this will go the way it needs to go. I like the fact that we have a director who is the director of Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles. Isn't that exciting? I said, "Oh my God!" No, I didn't. I said, "Really?" But the writers talked to Jonathan ahead of time, and then said, "Don't worry, he's on board. He's going to do what needs to be done. No, nothing to worry about." I like that we got Jon Favreau back. I thought we lost him for good after he disappeared into Chef. I thought, okay, so that's it. He's going to Chef at Disney. We'll never see him again. But he's come back on as an executive producer, so he's going to be very useful in many ways that don't have a lot to do necessarily with creativity, but do have a lot to do with the way the story goes. The power that gets behind the TV show, because it's really all about that as much as it's anything else. I don't know. Anybody want to ask me anything about this that I haven't touched on? Do you have any questions about this? Yes, sir.
When might it air?
When might it air? You know, every time I answer one of those, but why do I ask for people to ask questions? Because then you ask that question, and I say, I don't know. Because if I say I do know, it will not turn out to be then. The best I can guess right now from what I've heard is, given where they are at the moment, which is they're just up and running, is sometime next year, probably summer or fall. I would say something like that. But, you know, subject to change without notice, I guess. They got to cast it. They have to finish writing the episodes. They have to do all the pre-production work that's involved. I don't know anything about this stuff. I mean, I'm just talking words here. And having never been through this before, I should call George Martin, right? George, what's going to happen next? I read this article in the New York Times. I know what's going to happen next, and it's not a good thing. Yes?
How long is season?
How what?
How long is season?
The season will be 10 episodes, 2-hour pilot, and hour episodes after that is what I've given to understand. Again, probably subject to change without notice, who knows. But they're going to cover all of Alstones, you probably know that. They're going to tell the whole story in one season, and then we'll move on from there to whatever we decide is going to be the right way to go. Yes?
Is that hour-long episode with or without commercials?
Well, if you're like me, you don't have a clue because you never watch television. You just get the DVD or you stream it. As far as I know, all episodes are 45 minutes or so, aren't they, or 40 minutes? I don't know. I've never watched MTV. What goes on MTV? Isn't that the reality? Isn't that what, Keeping Up with the Kardashians or some damn thing?
That's hardly reality.
Well, all right. It's what passes for reality on television. Let's put it that way. I don't know. I don't know what MTV does, so I can't use that. Okay, well, go on and watch it. See what they do with other shows. What does Teen Wolf do? Doesn't anybody watch Teen Wolf? Do they have commercials? There you go. Commercials. Better stream it. Or you can what's it, TiVo it? You can TiVo it and then you can skip the commercials. I don't know. I'm sorry, I have, at the age of 70, I have no freaking patience anymore with anything. So commercials particularly, I have no patience for. So I stream or I watch everything on DVD. Yes, sir.
Do you know what's being filmed?
They haven't decided that yet, I don't believe. Or if they have, they're not telling me, which is more likely. Like Oregon, maybe? Well, it could be filmed in Oregon, couldn't it? Don't we? I mean, it all takes place in the woods. Yeah. Some woods or other, except for a few scenes in the city of whatever it's called. Oh God, it's just so sad. Names go away from me so quickly now, and that's why Sean is so useful because he still remembers stuff. I can remember the books, and I can remember exactly what year they were published in, and I can remember basic characters, and that's about it. If you want to know a plot, read the book. Anyway, sadly, yes, sir.
Are any of your books ebooks?
Are my books ebooks? Yes, they are. They are. In fact, there are many ebooks of my books, but I do not know which ones are which. Some are abridged. In the early days, they were all abridged because in the old days, unabridged books didn't sell. And now, of course, as we know, unabridged books are the ones that sell. Did I say that right? Maybe I didn't. But at any rate, yeah, they're out there. If you're interested, you can pick them up somewhere. Well, any place that sells them. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. The only other thing I have to tell you before we call it a day is that the Magic Kingdom movie is still alive and well. In case for those of you who are Magic Kingdom people, Steve Carell is still set to produce and play the role of Ben Holiday. It's still at Warner Brothers. The writer that was signed on is still signed on. He has just turned in a rewrite of the first draft, and we're hoping to make final changes, and then we're hoping the studio loves it. The process there is so different, I have to say. TV and I'm learning this. TV and movies are entirely different in the way they go about things. So I don't have any idea when this is going to come to fruition. If I were running it, it would have come to fruition a year ago, or maybe 10. But they don't seem to be too interested, and I don't have any creative control over this project, so I just have to throw in my 2 cents when I think it might do some good and hope that somebody at the other end will listen. And I have a couple champions there. Carell's been very good. He's been really helpful about the whole thing, so I'm hoping he'll hang in there. And so that's it. The next book comes out, I'm told, on July 7th of next year. Darkling Child comes out then. I have no idea about the third book, because as I said, I'm writing it at the moment, so I guess sometime in 2016, probably about the same time. I have a Cemetery Press is doing a illustrated, I never know how to say this, not. It's a copy, they're doing a new edition of Running with the Demon with illustrations. Okay, that's how I want to say it. Because when I say an illustrated edition, they say, oh, is it like manga? No, it's not. It's simply got like woodcuts or things like that, paintings or things like that. But it's another, limited signed edition, that's all. I don't know how many they're doing, 25 or something probably. And I don't even know when it comes out because there's no reason for me to know this, right? Maybe at some point I'll be advised. The best thing I can tell you is that as soon as we know, we throw everything up on the Terry Brooks website. So please go there for all things Brooks or all things that I know about and can put up there. I never hold anything back and put it all up there. Sean usually finds out before I do anyway, so probably talk to him about it. Okay, we're running out. Anything else before I call it a night here and we sign books? No, you just want your book signed, don't you? I don't blame you. That's the way I feel about it, too. All right, well, I will say to you, I'm surprised to see so many people here, especially after it was announced it was out in Beaverton, which has sort of been my home store for a while now. And I haven't had a chance to be downtown forever, so it's kind of nice to be here. But it's not a particularly wonderful day out there. Maybe that drove you all indoors, I don't know. But I do appreciate your coming out. I particularly appreciate the support you've given me over the years. As you know, I have a generational audience, which is a huge plus for any author. If you could reach from grandpa on down to grandson, then you've accomplished something in this business. And I'm hopeful that I can continue to keep your interest and not disappoint you with my books, particularly. I will say one more thing. Now I'm going to rant for just a minute. I know, I never do this, but I just think, why is it that everybody gets so excited when a book is made into a movie and that somehow, when this happens, authors gain validation? What the? I always thought that it was a great accomplishment to write a book. Now this requires some skill and effort and blood, sweat, and tears and so forth. And I've never felt, up until this moment, that somehow I wasn't validated in my writing career because I didn't have a movie or a TV show or some such. And yet, there's that whole thing. And the media-driven power of the internet and video is huge. It's huge. It's darn scary, frankly. No wonder we're trying to stamp out Amazon. Jeez. I just want to say, let's back off here and remember. So here's what I'm going to promise you. I'm going to promise you that I'm going to keep those books exactly where they've been all these years, because I can control that at least. I'll do my best for the rest of it, but at least with the books, when you pick up a Brooks book, it'll be what you're expecting and not some sham. And I'm not going to I'm going to say this right here, and you're going to say, oh yeah, well George said this too. I'm just going to say that my writing career is not going to get truncated or interrupted by anything else that happens. I'm still going to publish a book a year until I run out of things to say, or until you come up and say, that's enough, stop. All right, thanks again.